Welcome everyone. This is our 4th annual Parma Hilton Historical Society Pioneer Cemetery Tour, this year at Hoosic Hill Cemetery. The tour is presented in association with the Parma Public Library, so we thank you for helping to organize the registration. We also want to thank Bob Johnson for allowing us to park over there. And the Parma Special Police for helping to keep us safe and organize the parking. I also personally want to thank all of the volunteers that helped to plan and prepare and present this tour today. And lastly, to all of you attendees for coming here today and being interested in our local history. So thank you all for being here. So I'm going to start off with a little history of the area before we actually get into the cemetery. So this intersection at Manitou and Ridge Road was originally known as the Pioneer Hamlet of West Greece. And it straddles the line between the town of Parma and the other side of the road, the town of Greece. It's also known as Hoosic Hill in an enduring tribute to a local pioneer doctor by the name of Samuel Bradley. Right here. Dr. Bradley's home and office was located just south of here on Manitou on the Greece side of the road. And according to legend, whenever he would hitch up his horse and to go call on a sick patient, a neighbor would cry out, "Who's sick? Who's sick?" creating the name Hoosic, right? But unfortunately, this is just a legend. This quaint little story is just a fictitious tale, because according to Dr. Bradley's own diaries, this area was already called Hoosic when he arrived here in the 1820s. It was named Hoosic after the Hoosic Falls area, which is east of Albany, which is where a lot of the residents living here had come from. The cemetery here at Hoosic Hill is the oldest cemetery west of Ridge Road, west of the Genesee River on Ridge Road. And it contains the oldest known veteran's grave in the town of Parma, which is Ephraim Day, and you're going to be hearing more about him shortly. The cemetery actually predates the Congregational Church that was built on the site where Manitou Road is presently. The Congregational Church, you can see in this picture, was built in 1824, and again, that was the first religious structure built on Ridge Road west of the Genesee River. It was substantial in that it was 40 by 50 feet wide, and it had quite a large spire that could be seen from a distance. Right here where Manitou Road is. The congregation was active for many years, but as membership declined, the church was abandoned around 1900. The church fell into disrepair, and the town of Parma and the town of Greece agreed to demolish the building. Manitou Road originally jockeyed around the church to continue north. So if you look at this map here, south, this was Town Line Road. It jockeyed around the church, you'd cut over, and then you'd continue straight north onto Manitou Road. In 1928, Manitou Road was straightened here at Ridge Road, and it cut through where the original church was. It also cut off part of the hill from where the cemetery is, which is why the hill drops off so abruptly at Manitou Road today. In its heyday, this area was frequented by stagecoach travelers along Ridge Road. Surrounding this corner was many buildings. We had the Congregational Church. We had the Parma School number 13. You can see in this picture was located right around where you're standing today, in front of the cemetery. There was also various stores, a blacksmith shop, and a hotel. However, the hopes that the West Greece Hoosic area would turn into a village faded away as other areas prospered, such as Spencerport, with the completion of the Erie Canal in 1825. And then you had the railroads that came in later, south in the town of Gates and up north in the village of Hilton. So unfortunately, all of the commercial buildings that were in this area are no longer here. Some were demolished due to age and condition, such as the church. Others were moved and repurposed, such as the schoolhouse. It was moved from this location and it is now over on Dean Road. It no longer has this spire here up at the top. It's now a residence, so if you ever drive down Dean Road and try to guess which house it is, that's fun. And then some other buildings were destroyed by catastrophe, such as the Manchester Hotel in these pictures. There was an acetylene gas explosion in 1916. The hotel was located directly kitty corner to where we are right now, where West Hurt is, and that demolished that building. Even Dr. Bradley's office, so this is his home here, and his quaint little office. His home burned in the 1970s. But his office that you can see in this picture is still in existence. It's been saved and it's moved to behind the meeting house on Parma Center Road. So if you ever get a chance to go over there, you can actually still see this building. What's great about these pictures here is it also gives you a view of the back side looking north on Manitou Road. You can see how the road curved. This is the back of the church and the road curved around it. And you can see that from this picture here too. So as we lead you through the cemetery to hear the stories of these prominent residents, you're going to get a better understanding of the West Greece and Hoosic Hill area and the important impact that these residents had on our local community and beyond. So as we head on into the cemetery, I just want to make you guys aware that there are some footstones, some tripping hazards, so just be careful as you head in, and I will lead you up to hear our first story.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to see you. Which plate do you want? We have one more cobblestone.
My name is Margaret. I'll be telling you about a resident named Theodore Cushing. So Mr. Cushing's stone actually was right here. We don't know quite where it ended up, but we know it's here because his wife is here and his daughter Maria is just over this way. So Mr. Theodore Cushing was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts on March 9th, 1770. He was the fourth of 8 children to parents Captain Caleb Cushing and Sarah Sawyer. His father, Captain Caleb Cushing, fought in the Revolutionary War, leaving his family for the entirety of the war. He would periodically send home some of his continental money to help support the family, but unfortunately it was of very little value. So this left the family in a state of dependence on the work of Sarah and the older children. Theodore learned the furniture trade at a very young age. At the age of 8, he would walk up to 5 miles to reupholster chairs, which would earn him a pound of pork and a few quarts of meal that he would bring home to the family. Around age 18, he moved to New Hampshire to work as a salesman. In New Hampshire, around 1794, is where he met his soon-to-be wife, Abigail Jackman, whose stone is right here. He married Abigail on May 27th, 1798. They had 8 children, one of whom's name is Maria, whose stone is just over here to the left. In 1806, the Cushings moved to Vermont, where Theodore continued his furniture trade and farming. In 1831, he sold his farm and moved here to West Greece. While here, he continued the furniture trade, specializing in spinning wheels and Windsor chairs, which he carried on until his death in 1850. While residing here, he was in charge of the public library, and spent time writing for the press on various political matters. He made a principle of voting in all of the elections and supported the Federalist Party, followed by the Old Whig Party. The first vote that he ever cast was for George Washington in his second election. Mr. Cushing was an active member of the Church of Christ and a worker in the Sunday school. He was supportive of missionary work and made a habit of monthly contributions to the American Board of Foreign Missions. He was also a member of the Masonic Order and became a corresponding member of the New England Historic Genealogical Society in 1847. Theodore died on January 13th, 1850, after a brief illness. His funeral was very largely attended by the community because he was known as a good citizen, a kind neighbor, and a sincere Christian man. One of Theodore's famous acquaintances was Daniel Webster. Webster was one of the most prominent American lawyers in the 19th century who argued over 200 cases before the Supreme Court. In 1837, when Daniel Webster visited Rochester, he addressed a large political gathering. After dinner, Webster turned to Dr. Maltby Strong, who would soon become the mayor, and said, "Here comes a man to whom I need no introduction, Theodore Cushing. I knew him in Salisbury, New Hampshire, 38 years ago, and he is one of the most honest, industrious men I have ever known." This statement speaks to his reputation that continued throughout his life. That's the story of Theodore Cushing.
All right, so now
Everyone, I'm Henry Patterson. You can call me Doc Patterson if you'd like, because I was one of the very first doctors to practice in this area. I was here even ahead of old Doc Bradley. I was born down in Lisle, New York, down around Binghamton. 1794. My wife, Betsy here, born 2 years later, 1796. That was during George Washington's second administration. You heard about that fellow that voted. I was just born then. Betsy and I fell in love at first sight. I saw her over at the Congregational Church in Whitney Point. And when my dad, Josiah, decided to move our family up here, Betsy and I didn't want to be separated. We knew we wanted to be married. We were old enough. I was 18 and she was 16. So Betsy joined us and we all came up to Parma. Arrived in 1813. There was a war going on then. We've been fighting the British again ever since 1812. And we were in the process of invading Canada. We had a three-pronged approach. We were going to take Detroit, take Montreal, and then the whole Niagara frontier. But it was the worst fighting of the war, and before I knew it, I was on a ship getting ready to invade York, Fort York. They call it Toronto later. And we overpowered them, drove them off. But as they were retreating, they set off their ammunition and their gunpowder. We were gathering up prisoners and the fort exploded, dead and dying all around. Somehow I survived, and I didn't know what to do except help guys that were injured. Well, I apparently did a pretty good job because the medics asked me to stay on, and I spent the rest of the war as a medic, patching up fellas with every kind of injury you could imagine. We fought. Well, I'm going to tell one thing here. After the battle, our boys were pretty upset that they'd set off that ammunition. So we went on a rampage and burned down the whole town. Well, that set off a set of reprisal burnings. We later burned a place called Niagara. They call it Niagara on the Lake. And they came across and burned Queenston, and finally they burned Washington on us. And, well, I'll leave that for the historians to whether we should or shouldn't have. I got back to Betsy and the family, And in those days, you didn't become a doctor by going to medical school. There weren't any medical schools, just 2 or 3 of them. It was an apprenticeship. You worked with other doctors and learned how to do it. Well, I'd had about as much apprenticing as anybody'd ever had, and I became doctor right away. And I think I did pretty good at it too, because that was 15, they signed the treaty again. So by 21, 6 years later, I was asked to be a member of the newly formed Monroe County Medical Society. And it was a great honor for me to be asked. Erie Canal came through and the area started to really take off. Doc Bradley showed up, so I had some help around town. 1826, year after the canal, we were full of excitement and optimism. I caught the fever and died in 26. They buried me here next to Betsy, and well, that's where I stayed. I've stayed up until I had sort of a little chance to come back one day. You heard Amanda talk about how they moved the road, dug up the graves, and mine was one of them. My nephew put me over with my brother Tommy. He was a rich fella and made a lot of money over in Mount Hope. I might have rather gone down to Parma Union, where my brother John is buried. He was a great fella too. He went into the law, became a judge, and he's got the tallest gravestone in Parma Union Cemetery, and it was put up by the people of the town to honor him. We Pattersons are proud of our lineage. Thanks for coming out and listening to me. Have a good day.
You hear me? I am Matilda Drake Cole. I'm an old woman. I reached 82 years of age, so please forgive me if once in a while I seem a bit confused. I am a bit fancied up for a farmer's wife, but we don't get much company here, and I wanted to look nice for you folks. Lying beside me are my husband, Stephen Cole, and one of our sons, John. John tragically died at the age of 11 years. I was born in Somerset County, New Jersey in 1797, the granddaughter of Elisha Drake, a veteran of the War of Independence. I had 8 brothers and sisters. When I was still young, my parents moved our family to Ovid, Seneca County. And Stephen had been born in Ballston Spa, Saratoga County, but his family had moved also, so they were our new neighbors. Stephen had 10, he was one of 10 children. In 1814, 5 months after Stephen returned from his service with the New York State Militia in the War of 1812, we were married. I was 17 years old and he was 22. Our first 2 children were born in Ovid. But in 1821 or 1822, we moved to the newly formed Monroe County, and my Stephen is credited for having surveyed the line that separated Greece from Gates in 1822. Stephen and I had 9 children in total. Abram, Moses Seeley, Hiram, Catherine, Alfred Homer, he went by his middle name, John Charles, Charlotte, Sarah, and baby Matilda. Some, like Abram, stayed in this area, but others migrated to Ohio, probably to a bounty land grant I acquired as the widow of a war veteran. Some wound up in Michigan and in California, and now lots of other places. But we still have family here in Greece and in Parma. Moses Seeley became a doctor and had a house over in Hilton. Abram and his family stayed in the Greece area. And my great-great-great-great-granddaughter, Rebecca Myers Quinn, is from his line. As is her aunt, Deborah Cole Myers, who is around here somewhere. Excuse me. What are you saying, Stephen? No, I didn't forget. All right, but don't blame me if these people get confused and lose interest. I'm being urged to confess that what I just told you is both true and not true. Abram married a woman named Elizabeth McCarty. Abram's sister Catherine married Elizabeth's brother, a man with the unfortunate name of Julius Caesar McCarty. Their father, Benjamin McCarty, is also buried in this cemetery. Abram and Elizabeth had no children of their own, but when Catherine died, shortly after her son Abram McCarty was born, Uncle Abram and Aunt Elizabeth adopted the baby and changed his name to Abram Cole Jr. So it is that child, Abram McCarty Cole Jr., from whom Rebecca and Deborah descend. So the name changed, but the bloodline is exactly the same. After I lost Stephen in 1847, when he was 55 and I was 50, I made my home with one or another of my children. In 1850, I was in Greece with 5 of my children, and my brother, Cornelius Drake, was living with a neighbor, William Truesdale, and his family. In 1855, I was living with my daughter Charlotte and her husband, Alonzo Delaverne, in Parma. They moved to Michigan, and in 1862, Charlotte died there. But by 1860, I had moved in with my son Homer and his family on their place just north of Parma Corners. In 1865, I was living with my daughter and son-in-law, George and Sarah Cole Truesdale, on Madison Street in Rochester. In the house next door lived a family of alarmingly progressive women. And by the time Sarah got in trouble with them in 1872, I had moved back in with Homer and his family. The trouble, by the way, was that Sarah had voted with her neighbor, Susan P. Anthony. But we don't normally talk about that in polite society. Since 1879, I've lain at rest with Stephen and John here on Hoosic Hill. And we were so grateful to the people of Parma Hilton Historical Society who recently repaired my broken headstone. Thank you for patiently listening to an old woman reminisce.
Wonderful.
I'm nothing but a plain old soldier, an old revolutionary soldier, but I've handled a gun where noble deeds were done, and the name of my commander was George Washington.
Yeah, right.
My home and my country were, to me, were dear, and I fought for both when the foe came near. But now I meant only with a slight or sneer, for I'm nothing but a plain old soldier. nothing but a plain old soldier, an old revolutionary soldier, but I've handled a gun where noble deeds were done, and the name of my commander was George Washington. There are 4 more stanzas to this,
We got that.
but I couldn't memorize them in time. And I don't sing, so. I'm here today to represent Deacon Ephraim Day, who was born in 1741, and he died in 1825. Sorry about that. Ephraim Day was the son of Abraham and Irena Foote, and was born on July 10th, 1741, in Colchester, Connecticut. He was only 14 years old when he fought as a soldier in the French and Indian War. In 1754, he sailed up the St. Lawrence River with General Amherst and his troops to fight against the French in this conflict, which ended French claims to Canada. Ephraim also served during the Revolutionary War from Stafford, Connecticut, as a sergeant for 2 days during the Lexington Alarm, April 19, 1776. Ephraim Day married Sarah Ackley in Colchester, Connecticut in 1762. Ephraim and Sarah moved to Stafford, Connecticut shortly after 1764. They moved again to Winhall, Vermont between 1782 and 1784, where Ephraim worked as a farmer and deacon in the church. Ephraim and Sarah were some of the first residents of Winhall, and their son Salmon Day was the first child born in the newly formed town. While living in Winhall, they were the neighbors of Asa Beebe and his family. Asa Beebe is buried right over here. Ephraim's wife Sarah died in Winhall between 1820 and 1825. Following her death, Ephraim moved to Parma with his son Flavius Day. Flavius is buried right behind me. Flavius had purchased 60 acres of land in the Hoosic area from Benjamin Barrett in June 1820 for $1,600. Flavius was also one of the 6 trustees of the First Congregational Society of Parma in Greece, founded with the building of the church next to Hoosic Cemetery, where Manitou Road is presently, in 1824. And you all know where the church once stood. It was right here. The hill went out a little farther, and the church stood on the hill. It was an imposing structure when you came up Manitou Road from the north, and that church in the spire was the first thing you would see. Ephraim Day died August 23rd, 1825, and is buried right here in Hoosic Cemetery with his son Flavius and his daughter-in-law Persa Brooks. Ephraim's grave is the oldest known veteran's grave in the town of Parma. This is the oldest known grave in the town of Parma, both French and Indian War and Revolution. I have the pleasure today to also represent Asa Beebe. And Asa Beebe is this Asa here?
Yes.
Yes. Asa Beebe was born in Colchester, Connecticut, the same town that Ephraim was born in 1763. He was a young boy when he rode as an express messenger during the Revolutionary War on the Danbury Raid of 1777. When the British troops landed in Norwalk, Connecticut, messengers like Asa Beebe were dispatched to warn the local militias in the various towns of the movements of the enemy. Asa married Sarah Day, daughter of Ephraim Day, in 1790 and moved to Winhall, Vermont, on the top of the Green Mountains. Asa was the first town clerk of Winhall, several times a member of the Vermont State Legislature, and a justice of the peace for 23 years. He was also a member of the Bennington County Bible Society. He was an enterprising, industrious farmer and highly esteemed as a citizen and neighbor here in West Greece. In 1825, he sold his mountaintop farm and moved to West Greece. He most likely heard about the area from his brother-in-law, Flavius Day, who had purchased land in the West Greece area, again, from Benjamin Barrett in 1820. Asa also purchased his 91 acres from Benjamin Barrett. Asa Beebe was a diligent citizen of West Greece area and a member of the Vigilant Society of Parma in Greece. The Vigilance Society, in short, was active before 1850, and it was a group of honorable citizens who went after horse thieves and people who purloined other people's goods. And there were over 40 members of this committee. I won't take the time to read their names, but it's a very interesting little piece of Parma history. Asa's wife Sarah died in 1849, and by 1850, Asa moved in with his son Salmon Beebe and his daughter-in-law Abigail Parrish. Abigail is also buried here in the cemetery. Asa passed away the following year in 1851 and is buried in Hoosic Cemetery with his wife Sarah, daughter of Ephraim. I believe Sarah is this stone right here, and also a daughter, Lydia. Asa's sons Salmon and Abigail had 3 children, Albert, Silas, and Lydia. Their son Albert grew up to be a prominent in local politics as a member of the County Board of Supervisors in Parma in 1892 through 1905. He later became a state senator from 1905 to 1906. And so you see here in Hoosic we have some very prominent people, not only in Parma, but in all of Monroe County, and I might say even New York State. Thank you.
I'm not wired up. I sort of have a booming voice and I think everybody can hear me. I just want to add a little bit to what Amanda said at the beginning about the Hoosic Cemetery. No matter where we go throughout our country and actually throughout the world, every community sets aside a few acres where the mortal remains of our loved ones and neighbors are laid to rest. And of course, it's where we're standing now, a cemetery. And the word cemetery comes from the Greek word that means to rest. Now, if you also notice, every headstone in this cemetery is marble. There's no granite stones, which is the most popular medium today. The reason they're all marble is softer and could be engraved. There were several stone cutters in the Rochester area that probably made most of these stones. Also, historically, you will know that maybe even your family has some sort of a family crest that was a heraldic symbol. Now, pretty much they belong to the aristocratic people. Probably most of the immigrants to this country, that's a bad word, immigrants to this country were not of heraldic descent. Well, of descent, yes. In fact, I've noticed when I read a little bit about the history, one of the gentlemen that was in that class of people was a Gilbert Sheldon, and that name you'll even see in this cemetery. Isaac Sheldon was the immigrant ancestor. He was born in Ashford, England, and he sailed from Weymouth, England, in 1634. He became one of the first settlers of Northampton, Massachusetts, where he died in 1708. And from Northampton, Mass, the family went for several generations to Suffield, Connecticut. And from Suffield to, and we've heard other families that were there too, to Ovid, New York. down in Seneca County. And Jonathan and Rosanna Sheldon and family came here to Parma. Well, there's a little controversy, but somewhere between 1814 and 1816. And they settled on what is now Ridge Road near the Pease Road. Jonathan went out to Michigan to visit one of his sons, James, who had moved to Michigan, and he died there in 1842. But his wife, Rosanna Gillette Sheldon, is buried just over this way by the big tree that's still standing there. She died in, 1839. But then they had a son, Jonathan, who married Psyche Van Northwick. And that Jonathan was appointed Parma Overseer of Highways in 1826. He was the first trustee of the Union Library of Parma and Greece. He was a cabinet maker and also became a coffin maker. His shop was behind his house on Ridge and Pease Road. And because of his skills, which he started as a furniture maker, and historically, that's how my personal career started, because it was the furniture makers and the cabinet makers that became the coffin makers that became the first undertaker. Now be careful when you walk around, because I did disinter this casket. Not really. From this cemetery. But this is similar to what the caskets look like that he made. As he got older, he passed on the trade to an Edwin Twentyman, who was down in what we call today Parma Center, and he was an early undertaker down there. And then that was passed on to a Burritt, a Thomas Burritt, who was an undertaker down there in that area. The first Sheldons that were buried here were two children, and they both died, and one was 6 and the other 1 year old, and their graves, one of them I think is there, but their graves were the first Sheldons buried here, and they both died in 1824. We're privileged to have, step up here, sir. We're privileged to have Sheldon Errol Burritt with us. Better known as Seb. When I asked him to come here today to represent the Sheldon family, he said, I have relatives buried in that cemetery? He's probably driven by it 10,000 times and didn't know he wouldn't be driving by if it wasn't for the people that are buried in this cemetery. Yet actually, Luther Sheldon, right here, is Seb's great-great-great-grandfather. And he married Almeda Hills, who is buried right over here. They had lots of kids, but one of them was Gilbert Sheldon, and that's when I referred to way back in the heraldic times. There was a Gilbert Sheldon mentioned in the more of aristocratic level. So they're buried here, and then Seb's great-great-great-great-grandfather was the Jonathan that I mentioned that went to Michigan to visit his son and died there. Reverend Henry Alcott Sheldon was a minister that was actually born in Connecticut, but settled also for a short time in Ovid. but ended up in Ohio. And he had the foresight to begin the Sheldon family genealogy. He spent, beside his other duties of being a traveling minister, of starting a college out there, he started to compile data on the Sheldon family. Now, can you imagine? There wasn't even any snail mail then. But for him to reach all these Sheldon descendants, I don't know how it got there. Horse and Pony Express, I don't know. But he had collected around 17,000 names before he died. Then the unfortunate thing is, they were lost. All of his notes were lost for about 75 years. And then when they were rediscovered, here's a picture of him. I wish I had a better one of him. But when they were rediscovered, they established the Sheldon Family Association and began to publish the Sheldon magazine, which is still not published often, but are revised and things are added to it by the very active Sheldon Family Association, which, like a lot of groups, it's sort of not becoming as popular as it once was, but they have a large family reunion every year. The data has a very, very unique numbering system that, even though genealogy has been my hobby most of my late teen and adult life, I find it very hard to follow. Part of before becoming what I did for a living, I was a school teacher in Buffalo with genealogy as my hobby and interest, and I was very privileged to meet a Leland Sheldon in the stacks of the Buffalo Library, where they had a huge genealogical collection. And he was one of the people that was continuing to add on to the genealogy of the family. He actually lived in Williamsville, a suburb of Buffalo, but his Sheldon ancestors, well, they're descended from Luther also, are buried in Lakeview Cemetery, where he's buried in Brockport, New York. So it's still this very, very active family association, and Seb should be very proud that he is a member of it, or a descendant of it. A little bit more about Seb.
How many reunions?
Not good.
Well, I told you that he's descended from Luther and Almeida, and from Rosanna down the hill. Rosanna's husband, remember, went to Michigan. Well, then Seb's grandfather, who I personally knew, was Errol Grover Sheldon, who was the son of Luther Gilbert Sheldon. Luther Gilbert, that's not them, but see how the name was carried down for generations. And then Luther Gilbert had a Gilbert Sullivan, and his wife, Nellie Warner, are buried in Parma Corners Cemetery on 259 on the way to Spencerport. And then, of course, Luther and Almeida are buried here where we're standing. Now, I'm just going to add a word, then I want Seb to say a few things. Errol married a Myrtle Trainer and had Audrey Sheldon, Seb's mother, who married a Lloyd, better known as High Burritt. And they had Sheldon, Errol Burritt, what year? 1943.
April 27th.
So, tell us a little bit about your grandfather and grandmother.
Well, Myrtle, she was kind of rough. Putty Sheldon, my grandpa, was called Putty because he was a pipe fitter at Kodak.
Louder. Sorry.
My grandfather Errol Sheldon was called Putty Sheldon. He was a pipe fitter at Kodak. I guess that's where he picked up putty from. I grew up with them most of the time because we go to the Adirondacks because we have a camp up there, which my cousin Errol is up there right now. He was supposed to be here, but he's at the camp on Uncas Road. So it all started with my grandparents. They took me to the Adirondacks all the time because I had allergies and everything. When I was up there, I was fine. Myrtle used to yell at me all the time because I'd ask for stuff and and I beat her in canasta, and she'd send me to bed up in the camp. So that's about it.
Well, let's tell us just a slight aside about the camp. The facilities that are there.
There's still an outhouse, and Errol has kind of made it too homey now. Errol's, he's lost it. He's making it too nice now. When I went up there, we'd stop at the trading post, Frank Teach's trading post, and get a block of ice and put it in the refrigerator. That's where we get our ice from. And we had lanterns. You'd light them. Potbelly stove. You'd get that going. You'd walk in there in the wintertime and the frost would be on the wooden floor. You'd fire that thing up, it'd drive you right out if you were sleeping upstairs. It got so hot. So, yeah.
My dad,
go ahead.
No, my dad was a part of the hunting group, and for 3 or 4 years I would go up there. I know his brother Steve would be in that party, and a Simpson fella, and I know my father kept everybody awake with his snoring, way before CPAPs. So. But
that was the Uncas Road construction crew.
Yeah, and you might even see some jackets with that on it still. Yeah. And I've got my father's jacket, doesn't go around me quite, and a hat that he had. But the Sheldon family has truly, truly left their mark here in this part of Monroe County. And I know they will continue. There's still a lot of descendants of the family that are living here, including this gentleman here. How many children do you have? I'm trying to think.
I have 4.
4. And how many grandkids?
11.
11 grandkids. So it's going to go on and on and on.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Thank you.
Good. All right. So I'm going to talk to you today about Hall Colby. He was born in September of 1800 in Salisbury, New Hampshire. He was the son of Dr. Zacchaeus Colby and his wife, Abigail Hall. So he was named after his mother's maiden name, Hall. When Hall was 2 years old, his uncles Ephraim Jr., Isaac, Timothy, and Abraham left Salisbury and struck out for northwestern New York, currently the town of Ogden. 2 years later, the rest of the family joined them. They included Hall's grandparents, Ephraim and Mary Merrill Colby, his other uncles, Eastman and Merrill, and his parents. Everyone in the Colby family settled in the town of Ogden except for Hall and his parents. They settled here on Ridge Road in what is Greece. In 1820, Hall Colby married Eliza Barrett. Her picture's on here as well. And she was the daughter of Benjamin Barrett, who you're going to hear about in a second, and Dorothy Day, the daughter of Ephraim Day that you just heard about. They had 11 children: Salmon, Irene, Dorothy, Anne Maria, Eliza, Ephraim, Hannah, Francis, George, Abigail, and Mary. They were all born between 1822 and 1849. So Hall Colby began his life as a farmer, and he appeared to have a scientific mind even early in life. He published an article in the New Genesee Farmer newspaper in 1840, writing about his experiments using leached ashes to prevent his fence posts from rotting. He would explain how he would dig his fence posts 2 to 3 feet deep, layer them with ash, then stone, and layer it up until it filled the fence post hole. And he confirmed that by doing it this way, his fence post didn't rot, The ones that he left as normal had rotted. So around the mid 1840s, Hall Colby's interests moved to studying the solar system. It's unclear where he received his training or any education, but he became very knowledgeable in solar and nautical navigation. The first document that he published was a booklet called The Map of the Solar System, written in 1846. His studies led him to write other scientific books and become an inventor of multiple nautical instruments. Some of his many accomplishments were in 1847, he invented and applied for a patent for the Colby concentric duplicate mariner's compass, which is on this picture here. In 1854, he produced a magnetic orrery, which is a chart of the solar system. In 1856, he formed the Colby Nautical Instrument Company. In 1859, he wrote a book, The Improved Nautical Almanac. In 1872, he wrote a book on the physical laws and the universe of matter. In 1876, he wrote a book, The Nautical Astronomy Corrected. And in 1879, he was granted a patent on an altitude instrument from which testimonies in his booklet, Physical Laws on the Planetary System, had been in trial in steamships for many years. And these pictures down here are some of the pictures of his altitude instrument. An interesting fact about that was I did find one on the internet, still in existence, and it sold at auction just a few years ago for $1,400. So they're still out there. Beginning around the late 1840s through the end of his life, Hall Colby traveled to port cities such as Ogdensburg, New York, which is up north near Canada. He went to New Brunswick, New Jersey, and New York City. He went there to experiment and test these nautical instruments that he created. And he had built a strong relationship with many naval officers. And during the Civil War, he voluntarily provided his services to examining and correcting the compasses on those naval vessels. Between 1847 and 1875, Hall Colby claimed to have serviced over 260 vessels and instructed those operating the ships to keep them in service for the public benefit. And again, he did all of this without any compensation. In March of 1875, he petitioned the federal government to reimburse him for his services and produced testimonials signed by 23 ship captains and masters to support his claims. For example, Lieutenant C.G. Hunter certified that Hall Colby put 3 compasses on the U.S. steamer Scourge in 1847, which he cruised in the Mexican War. The lieutenant verified that the compasses were superior to any that he had ever used. For all of his services, the House of Representatives Committee on Claims awarded $10,000 to Hall Colby in 1875, which would be around $300,000 today. Hall Colby passed away on March 20th of 1882 at the home of his daughter, Eliza Goodell, in Brooklyn, New York. He is buried here in Hoosic Cemetery with his wife, Eliza. And we don't have the stone of Eliza, but their memory stone is here with the 2 of them. Thank you.
A quick question.
Yeah.
What are the initials on his stone? Do you know what they stand for?
No. Do you? I've been trying
I do, but I don't know off the top of my head. I think there's 3 of the kids married initials. Maybe.
I'm going to look at, because I've been trying to figure out what that was. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
I think I figured it out.
Okay.
Get in touch.
Yeah, which makes sense, because he was brought back here and then they would have erected the stone for him. Better? Yeah. I think it's better.
heard his name a few times already today. He was born in Hinsdale, New Hampshire in 1760. He was a private in the Revolutionary War for 145 days. I don't know why that's important unless it figured into his pension. He married Dorothy Day in 1782, and they came to West Greece, Parma in 1815. So he was 55 when he arrived here. And the best description of Mr. Barrett is land baron. Between 1815 and 1820, he bought over 500 acres of land in this area at a cost to him of $7,000. So he came here a wealthy man, but I don't know what he did before he arrived. As you've heard about the church up here, he sold the land to the church for $1. He was also one of the organizers of this church, one of the first 6 trustees that served. And after the Finney revivals went through the Rochester, Western New York area, we were called the burned over district because everybody got this religious fervor. Mr. Finney was convinced that if we could rid the world of alcohol, we would rid the world of lots of evils. So Mr. Barrett had gone to these revivals. He came back and he organized the Greece Temperance Society. Now, you all know what the Temperance Society was? You abstained from alcohol. Now think about this. Powerful man, leading member in the church, now the president of the Temperance Society. What do you think happened to the members of that church?
No alcohol.
In order to be a member, you had to sign an abstinence pledge that you would not drink. Now the interesting thing about this is right across the street, as you've seen, was a tavern owned by another member of the church. So there's speculation, was this what's called a temperance tavern, where you could go and have a good time but no alcohol? Was it a temperance tavern just for the church members and any travelers on Ridge Road could buy a drink? We don't know, but I think that must have been an interesting dynamic. He and his wife had 3 children that we can confirm. Alfred is down here. He was an ordained minister. We've already heard about Eliza. And then there's Hannah, who's right behind you is Hannah, who is married to Orrin Hale, another one of those 6 trustees at the Congregational Church. So a lot of religion in this family. He died in 1831, buried here. So he was 71 years old when he died. So he was only in this area for 16 years, but made quite the impact. His wife had died 2 years earlier in 1829, and she is buried here next to him. So Mr. Barrett was our land baron extraordinaire.
Can you hear me? It's good? Okay. So our last one today, his stone is facing the tree, so it's kind of hard to see, but on our way out, if you want to come take a look at the front. This is Zalvid Stevens. He was born as Resolvi Stevens in Peru, Massachusetts on August 29th of 1792 to parents William Stevens and Chloe Leland. Zalvid married Sophia Wiley, and they settled here in Parma around 1813. They had at least 2 daughters, Harriet and Olive, before his wife Sophia passed away in 1821. Zalvid then married Anna Peck, and they had 4 children, Chloe, Marietta, Francis, and William. Zolvid was an early merchant and built the first distillery in the town of Parma in 1817 at Parma Corners, which is the corner of Ridge Road and 259. He was also involved in many government positions, such as postmaster in 1816, the town clerk in 1825. He was also the town supervisor and magistrate. He was one of the founding board members of the Genesee County Agricultural Society in 1818. At that time, most land in western New York was in the newly created Genesee County that was created through the Holland Land Purchase of 1793. Monroe County would not partition off from Genesee County until 1821. So the first meeting of the Genesee County Agricultural Society was held in the Batavia Courthouse on November 11th of 1818. And the purpose of the society was to promote and improve agricultural and domestic manufactures. It cost $1 to join the society and just $10 for your lifetime membership. As a board of the directors, Zolvid's duties included creating bylaws, determining premiums for the exhibits at the annual fair, and he would also inspect the crops and the livestock and manufacturers at the fair. And it's interesting that the Genesee County Agricultural Society is still in existence today, and they still continue to have their annual Genesee County Fair in Batavia. So we have Zolvid to thank for starting that organization. Another interesting facet of Zolvid's life was his involvement in the anti-Masonic movement. So the anti-Masonic movement started in western New York after the 1826 disappearance of Freemason William Morgan. William Morgan was alleged to have been kidnapped and murdered by the Freemasons after he threatened to expose Freemasonry's secrets by publishing their rituals in a book. An interesting thing about Mr. Morgan was one of the last places he was seen alive was in this area of Ridge Road, more like Parma Corners. So Morgan's disappearance sparked a series of protests and suspicions against Freemasonry. Since Freemasons were often judges, businessmen, bankers, politicians, the ordinary citizens began to think of it as a corrupt elitist group. Average citizens felt that they had to organize and defeat this conspiracy to restore good government and purge these Freemasons from political positions. Zolvid himself was one of these citizens, and he was appointed one of the Monroe County delegates at the Western New York Anti-Masonic Convention held in Leroy on March 6th of 1828. Another interesting person that was a friend of Zolvid's that attended that meeting was a man by the name of Thurlow Weed. He was the owner of the Rochester Telegraph newspaper at that time, and he would go on to be one of the founders of the anti-Masonic political party. And Thurlow Weed would go on to support presidential nominations of William Harrison in 1840 and Zachary Taylor in 1848. So unfortunately, Zolvid didn't live that long, but he was part of that group to start the anti-Masonic political party. Zolvid Stevens passed away at the very young age of 38 on May 11th of 1831. He is buried here with his first wife, Sophia Wiley, his daughters, Harriet and Olive, and his son, William. And his second wife, Anna Peck, is also buried here, but she's around the middle of the cemetery under the name Anna Thorpe from her marriage to Samuel Thorpe after Zolvid's death. So I would like to leave you guys today by reading Zolvid's obituary, which was published in the Rochester Observer. Hear me better now? It speaks to his character. It's very beautiful. I think it speaks to a lot of the residents that are buried here. So, in Parma on the 11th, Zolvid Stevens, Esquire, age 38. In the death of Mr. S., the community has suffered a heavy loss. He had filled in a useful manner several public offices and was ardently engaged in promoting good order and advancing the best interests of society. He was also a follower of Christ, and in this relation, and as a member of the church, he was an active and efficient promoter of the cause of religion and exerted his talents and his influence in extending its blessings. His death will be felt as a severe calamity by his Christian friends, who have, however, the consoling reflection that he died in the blessed hope of glorious immortality. So I just want to thank you all for coming today. I appreciate all of you and your interest with our local pioneer cemeteries, our local history. If you haven't had a chance, please sign our registration book before you leave and take a look at some of the pictures that maybe you didn't get a chance to see, some of the pictures of the restoration work that we have done in this cemetery. Any donations that we receive go towards the restoration work in all of the pioneer cemeteries that we have in the town of Parma. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next year, where I think we're going to do Castle Cemetery next year. So thank you again.
Back row.
Yeah.